Xavier didn't believe in fate anymore, not after burying his father 3 months ago. But when the woman with honey-colored hair walked into the grief support group and sat down across from him with tears she was clearly trying to hide, something shifted in the cold emptiness he'd been carrying around. The community center room smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaning solution, a combination that had become oddly familiar over the past 12 weeks. Connor had started attending these Tuesday night sessions because his assistant Margaret had practically forced him to, concerned that he was working himself into an early grave. Losing his father to a sudden heart attack had knocked him sideways in a way nothing else ever had. His father had built Xavier Industries from the ground up, turning a small manufacturing company into a billion-dollar enterprise, and Connor had spent the last decade working alongside him, learning every aspect of the business. Then one morning his father simply didn't wake up, and Connor found himself at 32 years old running an empire while barely able to get out of bed. The grief group met in a circle of mismatched chairs that squeaked against the linoleum floor. There were usually about 8 people, faces Connor had grown familiar with even if he hadn't learned all their names. Paul, who lost his wife to cancer. Sandra, whose teenage son died in a car accident. Marcus, grieving his brother. They all had their stories, their pain worn openly in the shadows under their eyes. But this woman was new. She settled into her chair with a nervous energy, clutching a purse against her stomach like a shield. She wore a simple blue dress that looked expensive but understated, and her hair fell in waves past her shoulders. When she looked up and accidentally caught Connor's eye, she gave him a small, apologetic smile before quickly looking away. "Welcome, everyone," said Dorothy, the counselor who led the group. She was a kind woman in her 60s with reading glasses that hung on a beaded chain around her neck. "I see we have someone new joining us tonight. Would you like to introduce yourself?" The woman's hands tightened on her purse. "I'm Kiera Nelson. Thank you for being here, Kiera. We're glad you found us. Would you like to share what brings you to our group?" Kiera's eyes darted around the circle, and Connor noticed how green they were, like sea glass. My mother. She passed away 2 weeks ago. Pancreatic cancer. It happened very fast." Dorothy nodded sympathetically. "I'm so sorry for your loss. This is a safe space and you share whatever you're comfortable with, whenever you're ready." The meeting continued with its usual rhythm. People talked about their weeks, their struggles, small victories like making it through a birthday or finally being able to look at old photos. Connor mostly listened. He'd shared plenty in previous weeks, but tonight he found himself distracted, hyper-aware of Kiera sitting across from him, wiping her eyes with a tissue whenever someone else's story hit too close to home. When Dorothy asked if anyone else wanted to share, Connor surprised himself by speaking up. "I've been thinking about my father's office," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "I haven't been able to go through his things yet. Everything's still exactly how he left it. His reading glasses are still on his desk. His coffee mug is still in the same spot." "That's very normal," Dorothy assured him. "There's no timeline for these things, Connor. I know, but I work in the same building. I walk past his office every day, and it's like he's going to walk out any second and ask me about the quarterly reports." Connor ran a hand through his dark hair. "Except he won't, and I have to be the one making all the decisions now, and I keep thinking about what he would do, what he would say." "Your father trusted you," Dorothy said gently. "He prepared you for this, not for doing it without him." When the meeting ended an hour later, people lingered in small clusters, talking quietly or helping themselves to the stale cookies someone always brought. Connor usually left immediately, but tonight he found himself hanging back, watching as Kiera stood alone by the coffee station, stirring cream into a cup with intense concentration. He walked over before he could talk himself out of it. "First meetings are the hardest," he said. She looked up, startled, then gave him that same small smile from earlier. "Is it that obvious I'm terrified? Only because I remember my first time here. I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to convince myself to go inside. I almost didn't come in. I circled the block 3 times." She took a sip of coffee and made a face. "This is awful. It really is. I don't know who makes it, but they should be stopped." That earned him a genuine laugh, brief but real, and Connor felt something warm flicker in his chest. "I'm Connor. Kiera, but you probably heard that." "I'm sorry about your mother." Her smile faded. "Thank you. I'm sorry about your father." They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared grief hanging between them. Other people were starting to leave, calling out goodbyes to Dorothy. "Can I ask you something?" Kiera said suddenly. "Does it get easier, coming here talking about it?" Connor considered the question honestly. "I don't know if easier is the right word, but it helps, having people who understand." She nodded, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup even though the room wasn't cold. "I haven't been able to talk to my friends about it. They try, but they don't really get it. They keep telling me she's in a better place, or that at least she's not in pain anymore, and I know they mean well, but it doesn't help. No, it doesn't." Someone turned off half the lights, a clear signal that the center was closing. Kiera threw her coffee in the trash and adjusted her purse on her shoulder. "I should go. Thank you for talking to me, Connor. It actually did help. Will you be back next week?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. If I can make myself come inside again. If you want, I could wait for you in the parking lot so you don't have to come in alone." The offer surprised both of them. Connor wasn't sure why he'd said it, except that something about Kiera made him want to do something kind, to ease even a small fraction of the pain he saw in her eyes. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. "I know. But the offer stands." She studied him for a long moment, and Connor found himself hoping she'd say yes. Finally, she smiled again, warmer this time. "Okay, that would be nice." They exchanged phone numbers before leaving, and Connor drove home to his downtown penthouse feeling more alive than he had in months. It wasn't until he was getting ready for bed that he realized he'd spent the entire drive thinking about Kiera instead of his father. And instead of the guilt he expected to feel, there was just a strange sense of relief. The next week, Connor texted Kiera on Tuesday afternoon. "Still planning to come tonight?" Her response came a few minutes later. "Yes. Nervous, though. I'll be in the parking lot at 6:45. Look for the black Range Rover." When he pulled into the community center lot that evening, Kiera was already there, sitting in a silver Honda with her hands on the steering wheel. Connor parked next to her and got out, and she immediately climbed out of her car. "I was afraid I'd chicken out if I sat here too long," she admitted. Then perfect timing. He fell into step beside her as they walked toward the building. "How was your week, Long? I've been sorting through my mother's house. It's overwhelming. I can imagine. I still haven't dealt with my father's office. Maybe we're both just not ready yet. Maybe." Inside, the group was assembling. Dorothy greeted them both warmly, and Connor noticed Sandra giving him a curious look when he and Kiera sat down next to each other. The meeting followed its usual pattern, but Connor found himself more engaged than usual, particularly when Kiera shared about finding her mother's recipe box and breaking down in the middle of her kitchen. "She had this recipe for apple pie that she made every Thanksgiving," Kiera said, her voice thick with emotion. "There were stains on the card from where she'd spilled cinnamon, and notes in the margins about adding extra vanilla. And I just kept thinking about how I'll never taste that pie again. How I can follow the recipe exactly, but it won't be the same because she won't be the one making it." "Have you tried making it?" Dorothy asked gently. "Not yet. I'm afraid to. When you're ready, it might be a way to feel close to her, to honor her memory." After the meeting, Connor and Kiera walked out together again. The early September evening was warm, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. "Do you want to get dinner?" Connor asked impulsively. "Actual dinner, not terrible grief group coffee." Kiera looked surprised but pleased. "Really? Unless you have other plans." "No, I don't. Dinner sounds good." They went to a small Italian restaurant a few blocks away, nothing fancy, just a family-owned place with red checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles. Connor couldn't remember the last time he'd gone out to eat with someone who wasn't a business associate or family member. They ordered pasta and split a bottle of red wine, and Connor found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in months. "So what do you do?" Kiera asked, twirling linguine around her fork. "For work, I mean. Manufacturing, my father's company. I'm in charge now." He didn't mention the size of the company or his bank account. That could come later or maybe not at all. It was refreshing to talk to someone who didn't already know everything about him. That must be difficult, working at the place that was his. Every day. "But it's also what I know. I've been working there since college. What about you?" "I'm a teacher. 4th grade. I actually took a leave of absence after my mom died. I just couldn't imagine standing in front of a classroom right now." "How long have you been teaching?" 8 years. I love it mostly. The kids are exhausting but amazing." Her expression softened. "My mom was a teacher too. That's how I got into it. I used to help her set up her classroom every summer, and I just fell in love with the whole thing." They talked for 2 hours, the restaurant emptying around them until they were one of the last tables left. Connor learned that Kiera had a younger brother who lived in California, that she loved old movies and terrible reality TV in equal measure, that she'd been planning to take her mother to Ireland before the diagnosis came. Kiera learned that Connor had played baseball in college, that he'd once broken his arm falling off a horse at summer camp, that he secretly loved cooking even though he rarely had time for it. When they finally left, Connor walked Kiera to her car. The parking lot was quiet, lit by a single streetlight. "Thank you for tonight," Kiera said, leaning against her car door. "I needed this. Just normal conversation, without everyone looking at me like I'm about to shatter." "I know exactly what you mean." Connor hesitated, then said, "Would you want to do this again? Not just the grief group, but maybe dinner or coffee or something. Like a date, if you want it to be." Kiera bit her lip, thinking, "I'm not sure I'm in the right place for dating. Everything still feels so raw." "No pressure. We can just be two people who understand what the other is going through. Friends." "Friends sounds good," she said. But the way she smiled made Connor think maybe she was thinking the same thing he was, that friends might be how it started, but it didn't have to be how it ended. Over the next few weeks, Connor and Kiera fell into a pattern. They met at the grief group every Tuesday, went to dinner afterward, and started texting throughout the week. Connor found himself looking forward to her messages. Little updates about her day or funny stories about her neighbor's ridiculous dog. She sent him photos of her attempts at cooking her mother's recipes, including a truly disastrous first try at the apple pie where the filling had somehow exploded all over her oven. "I don't understand what I did wrong," she told him over coffee one Saturday afternoon. They'd started meeting on weekends too, walks in the park or lunch at local cafes. "I followed the recipe exactly. Maybe the pie dish was too small, maybe I'm cursed, maybe I'm destined to never successfully bake a pie. I'm sure that's it, an ancient pie curse, very common." She threw a sugar packet at him, laughing. Connor caught it and grinned back at her, and there was a moment where their eyes met and held, something electric passing between them. Kiera looked away first, tucking her hair behind her ear. "So I have to tell you something," Connor said. He'd been debating this for weeks, but it felt dishonest to keep avoiding it. "About my job." "Okay, Xavier Industries. You've probably heard of it." Recognition dawned in her eyes. "The manufacturing company, the huge one. That's the one. My father founded it. Which makes me technically a billionaire. I wanted you to know before you heard it somewhere else." Kiera sat back in her chair, processing. "A billionaire? Does that change anything? I don't know, should it? I hope not. I'm still the same person who can't make it through the grief group without Dorothy's terrible coffee." She smiled, but it was thoughtful. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because it's nice to just be Connor for once. Not Connor Xavier, CEO. Not Connor Xavier, whose father's death made the national news. Just Connor, who likes bad Italian restaurants and apparently has a new friend who can't bake pies." "That makes sense." She stirred her coffee slowly. "For the record, I don't care about the money. That's not why I like spending time with you." "Why do you like spending time with me?" "Because you get it. The grief, the weirdness of trying to move forward when part of you wants to stay frozen in the before. Because you make me laugh. Because you're kind." She met his eyes. "Because I think you might be the best thing that's happened to me in a really long time." Connor's heart kicked hard in his chest. "You're the best thing that's happened to me too." They left the cafe and walked through the park, the October air crisp with fallen leaves crunching under their feet. Without thinking about it, Connor reached for Kiera's hand, and she laced her fingers through his without hesitation. They didn't talk about what it meant, this shift from friends to something more, but Connor could feel it settling around them like a warm blanket. That night, Connor did something he'd been avoiding for months. He went to his father's office. The building was empty on a Saturday evening, just the night security guard who nodded at him as he passed. Connor unlocked his father's door and stood in the doorway, taking it all in. The huge mahogany desk, the walls lined with bookshelves and framed photos, the view of the city through floor to ceiling windows. He walked to the desk and picked up his father's reading glasses. They were heavy, expensive, the lenses catching the light. Connor had bought them for his father 2 Christmases ago. He set them down carefully and opened the desk drawer, finding the usual detritus of a busy life. Pens, notepads, business cards, a half-eaten roll of mints. In the bottom drawer, he found a file folder labeled Connor. Inside were newspaper clippings about Connor's college baseball games, printed emails where Connor had sent his father updates about projects at work, even a napkin from the restaurant where they'd celebrated Connor taking on the role of chief operating officer 3 years ago. His father had saved it all, documented their relationship in paper and ink. Connor sat down in his father's chair and let himself cry, really cry, for the first time since the funeral. He cried for everything he'd lost, for all the conversations they'd never have, for the grandchildren his father would never meet. And when he was done, when the tears had dried on his cheeks, he pulled out his phone and called Kiera. "Hi," she answered, her voice soft. "Everything okay?" "I'm in my father's office. I finally came in." "Oh, Connor, how are you feeling?" "Sad, but also okay. I found a folder of things he kept about me. Articles and emails and random stuff. I didn't know he saved any of it. He was proud of you." "Yeah, I think he was." Connor looked around the office, and for the first time it didn't feel quite so heavy. "Thank you." "For what?" "For making me feel like I could do this. I don't think I would have come here if it wasn't for you." "You would have. When you were ready. Maybe. But I'm glad I didn't have to figure it out alone." He paused. "Kiera, I want to see you tomorrow. Is that okay?" "More than okay. Come over to my place. I'll cook for you. Not pie, I hope." Her laugh was warm through the phone. "Definitely not pie. I'll stick to something I can't explode." "Maybe pasta." Sounds perfect. Kiera's apartment was in an older building in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place with crown molding and hardwood floors that creaked. She answered the door in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled up in a messy bun, and Connor thought she'd never looked more beautiful. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "Fair warning, my cooking might not be as good as our usual restaurant. I'm sure it will be great." Her apartment was cozy and lived in, full of bookshelves and plants and framed photos. Connor noticed pictures of a woman who must have been Kiera's mother, the same honey-colored hair and green eyes, smiling in various locations and life stages. They cooked together, Kiera directing Connor to chop vegetables while she made the sauce. They moved around the small kitchen easily, bumping hips and stealing tastes from the pan. Music played from a speaker on the counter, something jazzy and low. It felt domestic and intimate in a way that made Connor's chest tight with longing. Over dinner, Kiera told him about her decision to go back to work. "I called my principal yesterday. I'm going back after Thanksgiving break. I think I'm ready." "That's great. Your students must miss you." "I miss them too. And I think my mom would want me to get back to it. She always said teaching was the most important job in the world." She was right. I still remember my favorite teachers. They did dishes side by side, and when they were done, Kiera led Connor to the couch. They sat close together, Kiera's head on Connor's shoulder, his arm around her waist. The TV played some old movie neither of them were really watching. "Connor," Kiera said quietly, "what are we doing?" "What do you mean? This, us, is this real?" Connor turned so he could look at her properly. Her face was tilted up toward his, open and vulnerable and beautiful. "It feels real to me. Does it feel real to you?" "Yes, but I'm scared. I didn't expect to meet someone right now, especially not like this. I'm still grieving. I'm still a mess half the time." "I'm a mess too." "We can be a mess together." "Is that healthy? Two grieving people trying to build something?" "I don't know," Connor admitted. "But I know that I haven't felt this okay in months, that when I'm with you the world feels less heavy. That I think about you constantly, and I want to know everything about you, and I want to be there for you the way you've been there for me." Kiera's eyes were shining. "I want that too." "Then let's try. No pressure, no expectations. We'll just take it one day at a time and see where it goes." "One day at a time," she repeated, like a promise. Connor kissed her then, soft and gentle, and Kiera kissed him back with a sweetness that made his heart ache. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped up in each other on her couch, finding comfort and connection in equal measure. The next few months were a study in falling in love while learning to live again. Connor and Kiera continued going to the grief group through the end of the year, finding that having that space to process their loss made everything else easier. Dorothy watched them with knowing eyes, pleased to see two of her regulars finding solace in each other. Connor slowly started to make his father's office his own, bringing in new furniture and family photos, but keeping some of his father's things as reminders. He hung his father's favorite painting on the wall and kept that folder of clippings in his desk drawer, pulling it out sometimes when he needed to feel close to the man who'd shaped his entire life. Kiera went back to teaching and found that her students were exactly what she needed. Their energy and innocence and endless questions reminded her that life continued, that joy was still possible. She started bringing Connor stories about her kids, and he loved watching her face light up when she talked about their breakthroughs and triumphs. They spent Thanksgiving together, just the two of them in Connor's penthouse, cooking an elaborate meal that was probably too much food for two people but felt right anyway. Kiera made her mother's apple pie, and this time it turned out perfectly, golden and flaky and filled with cinnamon-sweet apples. They ate it for breakfast the next morning, sitting in Connor's massive kitchen and laughing about nothing in particular. In December, Connor took Kiera to the Xavier Industries holiday party. It was the first year he'd attended without his father, and he'd been dreading it until Kiera agreed to come with him. She wore a green dress that matched her eyes and charmed everyone she met, from Connor's executives to the factory floor workers who'd known his father for decades. "Your dad would have loved her," Margaret told Connor during the party, watching Kiera laugh at something one of the engineers was saying. "She's genuine. That's rare in our world." "I know," Connor said, unable to take his eyes off Kiera. "I'm going to marry her someday." Margaret raised her eyebrows. "That's fast." "When you know, you know." "Does she know?" "Not yet. But she will." On Christmas morning, Connor and Kiera exchanged gifts in her apartment. She gave him a leather-bound journal and a first edition of his favorite book. He gave her a necklace with a small pendant shaped like an apple, a reference to her teaching and her mother's pie. She cried when she opened it, happy tears this time, and kissed him until they were both breathless. "I love you," Kiera whispered against his lips. "I know it's fast, and maybe I'm supposed to wait longer, but I love you." "I love you too," Connor said, pulling her close. "I've been waiting to say it for weeks." They spent the rest of the day in comfortable contentment, cooking breakfast and watching holiday movies and talking about the future in the careful way of people who were starting to believe in it again. The new year brought changes. Connor introduced Kiera to his mother, who'd moved to Florida after his father's death but came back to visit in January. His mother took one look at Kiera and pulled Connor aside. "She's the one, isn't she?" His mother said. "Yes. Your father would approve. She's strong, kind. She looks at you like you hung the moon." "I look at her the same way." His mother smiled, the first real smile Connor had seen from her since his father died. "Then don't let her go." Kiera introduced Connor to her brother Marcus when he flew in from California in February. Marcus was a graphic designer, laid back and funny, and he pulled Connor aside at dinner. "Kiera's been through a lot," Marcus said seriously. "Not just with Mom. She had a rough relationship a few years back, guy who took advantage of how nice she is. I don't want to see that happen again." "It won't," Connor promised. "I love your sister. I want to spend my life making her happy." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good, because she's crazy about you. I haven't seen her this happy in years." In March, Connor convinced Kiera to go away with him for a long weekend. They flew to a resort in the mountains, a place with cozy cabins and hiking trails and stunning views. They spent their days exploring and their evenings by the fireplace, talking about everything and nothing. On their last night, Connor led Kiera out to the cabin's deck. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by city lights. He'd been carrying the ring in his pocket all weekend, waiting for the right moment. "Kiera," he said, taking both her hands in his. "A year ago I was drowning. I'd lost my father. I was running a company I wasn't sure I was ready for, and I couldn't see a way forward. Then I walked into that grief group and saw you sitting there, trying so hard to be brave, and something in me shifted." "Connor," Kiera breathed, tears already forming in her eyes. "You saved me. Not in some dramatic way, but in all the small ways that matter. You reminded me how to laugh, how to feel, how to imagine a future that could be good again. You've been my best friend and my anchor and the love of my life. I don't want to do any of this without you." He dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring box. Kiera's hands flew to her mouth. "Kiera Nelson, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said immediately, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." Connor slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple platinum band with a single perfect diamond, and stood to kiss his fiancée. Kiera threw her arms around his neck, and they stayed like that under the stars, holding each other and crying and laughing in equal measure. They got married in September, a year and a half after they first met. The ceremony was small and intimate, just family and close friends, held in the garden of a historic mansion outside the city. Kiera wore a simple ivory dress with lace sleeves, and Connor wore a dark suit, and when they said their vows, they both cried. "I promise to be your partner in grief and in joy," Connor said, his voice thick with emotion. "To hold you when the bad days come and celebrate with you when the good days arrive. To honor your mother's memory and my father's memory by building a life that would make them proud. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life." "I promise to be your home," Kiera said, tears streaming down her face. "To support your dreams and share your burdens. To make you laugh when you're too serious and keep you grounded when the world gets overwhelming. To love you through everything forever." At the reception, Connor's mother gave a toast. "When Connor's father died, I worried about our son. He carries so much responsibility, and I was afraid he'd lost the ability to let anyone in. But then he met Kiera, and I watched him come back to life. Kiera, you've given him something precious, the courage to be vulnerable, to love again, to believe in tomorrow. Thank you for loving my son. Welcome to our family." Marcus gave a toast too, telling embarrassing stories about young Kiera that had everyone laughing. "But seriously," he finished, "Connor, you better take care of my sister. She deserves the world, and I think you're going to give it to her." "Every day," Connor promised. They honeymooned in Ireland, the trip Kiera had wanted to take with her mother. They visited small villages and ancient castles, hiked along dramatic coastlines, and drank Guinness in cozy pubs. One afternoon, standing on the cliffs of Moher with the wind whipping around them, Kiera said, "I wish my mom could have seen this. She would have loved it." "She can see it," Connor said, pulling her close. "Through you. You're carrying her with you, her love of adventure, her joy in beautiful things. That's how we keep them alive, right? By living the lives they'd want us to live. When did you get so wise? I married a teacher." It was bound to rub off. They returned home to their new reality. Married life in Connor's penthouse, which Kiera had filled with plants and books, and all the warmth it had been lacking. She kept her teaching job, and Connor continued running Xavier Industries, but they made sure to carve out time for each other. Weekly date nights, lazy Sunday mornings, spontaneous adventures when they both needed to escape the routine. In November, Kiera surprised Connor with news that made his heart stop. "I'm pregnant," she said, holding out the positive test with shaking hands. "I know we weren't planning it this soon, but surprise." Connor picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "This is the best surprise. The absolute best. You're not worried about timing or anything. Are you kidding? I'm thrilled, terrified but thrilled." They told their families over Thanksgiving, and Connor's mother cried happy tears while Marcus immediately started planning to be the world's best uncle. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Connor found himself falling even more in love with Kiera as he watched her body change and grow. She was radiant, teaching her fourth graders right up until her maternity leave started, fielding their endless questions about the baby with patience and humor. Their daughter was born in early July, tiny and perfect with Kiera's green eyes and a shocking amount of dark hair. They named her Rose Catherine, Rose for Kiera's mother and Catherine for Connor's grandmother. Connor held his daughter for the first time and felt something fundamental shift in his chest, a fierce, protective love unlike anything he'd experienced before. "We made a person," he whispered to Kiera, who was exhausted but glowing in the hospital bed. "An actual person. We did. She's perfect. Just like her mother." Rose was an easy baby, all things considered, though the sleepless nights tested them both. Connor learned to change diapers and warm bottles, to soothe her when she cried and make ridiculous faces to get her to smile. Kiera nursed and sang lullabies and somehow managed to make everything look effortless even when Connor knew she was exhausted. They brought Rose to the cemetery one afternoon when she was 3 months old. First to visit Connor's father's grave, where Connor held his daughter close and told her about the grandfather she'd never meet. "He would have spoiled you rotten," Connor said softly. "He would have taught you about business and taken you to baseball games and been so proud to be your grandpa." Then they went to Kiera's mother's grave, where Kiera laid flowers and let her tears fall freely. "Hi, Mom," she said. "I brought someone to meet you. This is Rose, your granddaughter. I wish you could hold her, but I'll tell her all about you. About your teaching and your kindness and your terrible apple pie that I finally figured out how to make. I love you. I miss you every day." Connor wrapped his free arm around Kiera, holding his wife and daughter close. They stood there for a long time, a family built from grief and love in equal measure. Rose's first Christmas was magical. They decorated the penthouse with a massive tree and played carols and took approximately 5,000 photos. Connor's mother came to visit and spent hours holding her granddaughter, telling her stories about her grandfather. Marcus flew in from California and taught Rose to giggle by making silly noises. On Christmas Eve, after everyone had gone to bed and Rose was sleeping in her crib, Connor and Kiera sat together on the couch with mugs of hot chocolate. "You remember 2 years ago," Kiera asked, "our first Christmas together, when you gave me the journal and I gave you the apple necklace?" "Yeah, I was so scared that day. Scared that I was falling in love too fast, that I was using you to avoid my grief, that it was all going to fall apart." "I was scared too," Connor admitted, "but also sure. I knew that day I was going to marry you someday. Really, really. Margaret asked me if I'd told you yet, and I said not yet, but I would." Kiera snuggled closer to him. "I'm glad you were sure, because this us, Rose, it's everything I didn't know I needed. We've built something good, haven't we? The best thing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the tree lights twinkle and listening to their daughter's soft breathing through the baby monitor. Connor thought about the grief group where they'd met, that circle of mismatched chairs in a community center room. He thought about how broken he'd been, how lost, and he thought about Kiera walking in with tears in her eyes and how that single moment had changed the entire trajectory of his life. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what?" "For coming to the grief group that night, for staying, for giving us a chance." Kiera lifted her head to look at him. "You know, I almost didn't go that night. I sat in the parking lot trying to convince myself to leave, but something made me go inside. I'm glad you did. So glad. Me too. Best decision I ever made." Connor kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise and a celebration. They'd found each other in the darkest time of their lives and built something beautiful from the ashes of their grief. They'd created a home, a family, a future full of possibility. 2 years later, Kiera gave birth to their son, James Richard, named for Connor's father and Kiera's grandfather. Rose was a devoted big sister, always wanting to help with bottles and diaper changes. Connor had to take a step back at work, promoting some trusted executives so he could spend more time with his growing family. Xavier Industries continued to thrive, but Connor learned that success meant nothing if he wasn't there for the moments that mattered. They moved out of the penthouse and into a house in the suburbs with a yard big enough for swing sets and birthday parties. Kiera went back to teaching part-time, finding a balance that let her be present for her kids while still doing the work she loved. Connor coached Rose's soccer team and took James to father-son music classes, and discovered that being a dad was the role he was born to play. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they went back to the community center where they'd met. The grief group still met on Tuesday nights, Dorothy still leading with her kind wisdom and terrible coffee. They didn't stay for the meeting, just stood in the parking lot where Connor had waited for Kiera so many times. "You ever miss it?" Kiera asked. "The grief group?" "Sometimes. It was important what we found there, but I think we graduated, you know. We learned to carry our grief without letting it destroy us. We learned to live again." "We did." Connor pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "We built a life our parents would be proud of." "Do you think they know?" "Wherever they are, I think they know. I think they're happy for us." They stood there for a while longer, remembering who they'd been when they met and marveling at who they'd become. Two broken people who'd found each other at the exact right moment, who'd chosen to build something together instead of drowning alone, who'd turned their grief into gratitude and their pain into purpose. When they got home, Rose and James were still awake, being spoiled by Connor's mother who was babysitting. They put the kids to bed together, reading stories and singing songs, then collapsed on the couch in exhausted contentment. 5 years, Kiera said, curling up against Connor's side. "It feels like forever and no time at all. I love our life. Every messy, chaotic, beautiful part of it, me too. Though I could do without James waking up at 5 a.m. every morning," Connor laughed. "He gets that from you. You're the morning person. I am not. That's you. We're both morning people now. We have kids. We don't get a choice." They fell asleep there on the couch, wrapped up in each other, and when Connor woke in the middle of the night to carry Kiera to bed, he took a moment to just look at her. His wife, the mother of his children, the woman who'd saved him without even trying. The woman who'd walked into a grief group with tears in her eyes and stayed not because she had to, but because something about that moment, about him, about them together, felt right. Years continued to pass, each one full of its own joys and challenges. Rose started school and thrived, her confidence and kindness making Connor and Kiera burst with pride. James turned out to be musical, obsessed with anything that made noise, and they got him a small drum set that drove them both crazy but made him ecstatically happy. Connor took Xavier Industries in new directions, focusing on sustainable manufacturing and fair labor practices, honoring his father's legacy while making it his own. Kiera became a mentor teacher, helping train new educators, finding that she loved supporting others in their teaching journey. They made annual trips to the cemetery, bringing the kids to visit grandparents they knew only through stories and photos. Connor and Kiera took turns sharing memories, keeping Rose Catherine and James Richard alive for their children. Rose would bring flowers she picked herself, and James would chatter about his day to gravestones that didn't answer back, but somehow felt less lonely because of him. On what would have been Connor's father's 70th birthday, Connor sat in his office, the office that had once been his father's and was now unmistakably his own. He pulled out that folder of clippings and added to it Rose's first drawing of their family, James's first recital program, a photo from his and Kiera's anniversary. His father had documented Connor's life, and now Connor was documenting the life his father had never gotten to see but would have loved beyond measure. That night, Kiera found him at his desk at home, staring at old photos. "Thinking about your dad?" she asked, coming up behind him to wrap her arms around his shoulders. "Yeah, wishing he could have met the kids. Met you, really met you." "I wish that too. But Connor, look at everything you've built. The company is stronger than ever. We have these amazing kids. We're happy." "That's the best tribute you could give him. I know. I just miss him sometimes." "That's okay. You're allowed to miss him. Even with all the good things, you're still allowed to grieve." Connor turned in his chair and pulled Kiera into his lap, burying his face in her shoulder. "How did you get so wise?" "I married a CEO. It was bound to rub off." He laughed, recognizing his own words from years ago thrown back at him. "I love you so much. I love you too. Now come on, Rose made dinner and she's very proud of her macaroni and cheese from a box. The height of culinary achievement. Absolutely. They went downstairs to their warm, chaotic kitchen where their children were setting the table with mismatched plates and arguing about whose turn it was to say grace. Connor looked at his family, really looked at them, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, this beautiful, messy, perfect life, had grown from the worst day of his existence. He'd met Kiera because he lost his father, and while he'd give anything to have his father back, he couldn't imagine his life without her, without their children, without this family they'd created. That night, tucking Rose into bed, she asked, "Daddy, do you think Grandpa James can see us from heaven?" "I think so, sweetheart. What makes you ask?" "I just want him to know we're okay, that we're happy." Connor's throat tightened. "I think he knows, and I think he's very proud of you. And Grandma Rose too, Mommy's mom, her too. They're both watching over us." Rose nodded, satisfied, and snuggled under her covers. "Good, I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Rosebud, sweet dreams." Connor stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his daughter drift off to sleep, this perfect little person who carried his father's name in her own. Then he went to James's room, where Kiera was finishing story time. His son was already half asleep, clutching a stuffed elephant and fighting to keep his eyes open. "Night-night, buddy," Connor whispered, kissing his forehead. "Love you, Daddy," James mumbled. "Love you more." Later, lying in bed with Kiera curled against his side, Connor thought about the question he'd asked himself so many times in those first dark months after his father died. How do you move forward when the person who taught you everything is gone? How do you build a life from the ruins of your grief? The answer, he'd learned, wasn't simple or easy. It wasn't about forgetting or getting over it. It was about carrying your grief with you while still making room for joy. It was about honoring the past while building a future. It was about finding someone who understood that you could be happy and sad at the same time, who loved you through the complicated mess of healing. It was about walking into a grief group on a Tuesday night and meeting a woman with honey-colored hair and green eyes who was trying just as hard as you were to figure out how to keep breathing. It was about recognizing something in her pain that matched your own and choosing to not face it alone. Connor had gone to that grief group expecting nothing more than to get his assistant off his back. He'd never expected to meet the love of his life there, had never imagined that a woman who didn't need to stay, who could have disappeared after that first night or the second or the 10th, would choose to keep showing up. For the group, for herself, for him, Kiera had stayed. She'd stayed through the grief and the healing, through the falling in love and the building of a life together. She'd stayed through pregnancy and parenthood and all the beautiful chaos that came with it. She'd chosen him, kept choosing him, every single day. And Connor had chosen her right back, would keep choosing her for the rest of his life. "What are you thinking about?" Kiera murmured sleepily. "You, us, how lucky I am." "We're both lucky." "Yeah, we really are." Kiera pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Go to sleep, Connor. Tomorrow Rose has soccer and James has that birthday party, and we both need to be functional. The glamorous life of parents. Wouldn't trade it for anything." "Me neither." Connor closed his eyes, holding his wife close, listening to the quiet sounds of his house settling around them. Their children sleeping down the hall, safe and loved. Photos of lost parents watching over them from the walls. A future stretching out ahead of them, uncertain but full of promise. He'd never expected any of this. Never expected that his grief would lead him to love, that loss could somehow open the door to everything he'd ever wanted. Never expected the woman from the grief group to stay, to become his wife, his partner, the mother of his children, the love of his life. But she had stayed. And they'd built something extraordinary together. something worth every moment of pain it took to get here. Connor drifted off to sleep with a smile on his face, grateful beyond measure for the unexpected gift of Kiera's presence in his life, for every single day they'd been given together, and for all the days still to come.